Hey everybody, this is Coach Sean, and in this video I'm going to speak on the topic of quitting and quitters. I did about a week's worth of research looking at top psychologists and self-help specialists to understand what causes people to quit, how to become, or I should say, how to get out of the quitter's mentality if you already are a quitter, and just some psychological background to understand the scientific reasoning for quitting. So let's get right into it, shall we? What causes people to quit? Well, first, specialists say that viewing mistakes as failures and not lessons is one big reason people tend to quit. Also, putting value only in your goal and not the process obtaining that goal is another reason for quitting. Specialists also say self-sabotage through lack of self-belief is a huge one, and I've seen that firsthand just a couple weeks ago. Lack of discipline is another huge one that I've seen my clients and specialists say is an issue for people to quit. People expect results very quickly and don't have the discipline to get to their goal. Very, very straightforward and quite obvious. Many people do that. Also, specialists say that not adjusting to change in your new environment is a reason for quitting. So a good example is this. Say for instance, at your office, you have people ordering pizza and Hooters every other day. Probably would be a good idea to adjust to that environment by not eating in the cafeteria anymore and eating in your office. Also, specialists do say that comparing your journey and your experience on the way to your goal to anybody else's is going to cause you to quit. Most of the time, especially with social media nowadays, everyone has highlight reels, and it doesn't look like anyone struggles at anything if you look at their social media. But in reality, people do have struggles. So do not compare your journey to anybody else's. So those are some reasons that specialists say that people quit. Now, what happens if you already are a quitter? How do you get out of that quitter's mentality? Well, first and foremost, specialists do state that you need to realize that this is a habitual mindset. What happens is thought patterns play out and will cause issues in not only the area that you're quitting in, but later on in other areas of your life. So it is pretty serious. Quitters need to realize that there is struggle in many goals that you're trying to obtain. You may be really good in other areas of your life, but this particular area, there is a struggle, and you need to realize that that is normal, that most people do struggle in many areas of their life, and just because you don't doesn't mean you're not going to struggle in this particular goal that you're trying to obtain that you've quit on. Outside influences and opinions you need to let go of if you're a quitter, because those are what is sidetracking you. That is what is causing you to keep the quitter's mentality. Also, specialists say that circle of friends that you're in most often are the reason for the influences. So you may already have a circle of quitters and cowards around you. Therefore, you need to maybe limit the time that you spend around these cowards. I should say quitters, I'm sorry. Kind of go hand in hand. Also, addressing the real issue, specialists say, is going to get you out of being that quitter. So the goal isn't the issue, it is what you're lacking in here, specialists say. So look at what you're lacking and work on that. While doing that, specialists do say that you need to be more patient with yourself. Oftentimes, quitters are very impatient and expect results very quickly because they're successful in other areas of their life. In this particular area, they are not, and therefore they actually have to work for it. You need to be patient with yourself. Also, be more proud of every single little accomplishment on the way to a bigger accomplishment. Give yourself more credit along the way. Also, recognizing the opportunity to learn. Most quitters do not look at struggles as lessons. I spoke about this earlier, not quitting or avoiding quitting. This is also an area that you have to focus on if you're already a quitter. You need to understand the struggle is part of the learning process and is also going to build character in you so that once you've obtained that goal, you will know how to maintain that goal and keep it. So those are some ways of how to get out of quitting. I'm going to go to my psychology research here, and in psychology they term quitting as learned helplessness, which is a very sad term if you just listen to it. You learn how to be helpless. So you basically learn how to be an infant newborn baby eventually. You become helpless in all areas of your life eventually, since it is a habit, like I spoke about earlier. Um, so psychologists do say, since it is a learned helplessness, that you can actually unlearn it, but you need to start adopting some different mentalities. First and foremost, they state that you need to adopt the mentality that you can create change in your life. It may not be the change you want, it may not be the goal you're after, but as long as you mentally are aware that you can create change in your life, you can now build hope. And that is the path to getting out of that quitter's mentality. So once you build hope, once you've adopted that first mentality, you need to now move from a I can't mentality to an I can at least try mentality. Therapists, or I should say psychologists, do state that this is a very difficult process and you may not be able to do this alone, so therefore you should seek a therapist or counselor to help with special techniques and tools that will help you get out of that mindset. It is actually very seriously viewed in the psychology world. So yeah, that just states it right there. From a scientific standpoint, quitting is extremely serious, and they've termed it learned helplessness. So I mean, if that doesn't scare you away from wanting to ever quit alone, let me tell you about some personal experiences I've had. I will speak on my own personal experience of myself quitting 15 years ago during college. My second time around in college, I should say. I was going for a medical degree, and I could not get into a nursing program. So I quit on myself after a few applications, not identifying what I lacked, like it stated earlier in my information. I didn't identify that I needed to boost my GPA by probably taking over some classes, and I quit on myself. And what happened in the next 5 years is it snowballed out of control, and I began quitting in other areas of my life, pretty much destroying all of my life eventually. And it took about 10 years for me to rebuild myself from the inside out. So that is why I wanted to speak on this specific topic, is because I know how damaging it is. And I've seen clients who quite literally are morbidly obese and dying from their weight, and yet they quit on themselves. Quite frankly, it's the saddest thing I see, and I pity them because they lack that inner drive to want to do what is needed to be done. And who's going to suffer? Not only them, your families. Their families are going to suffer, because when they die, you died prematurely, and that's really unfortunate. And you leave behind children and family that knew that you could have done something about this, and yet you were a coward and you ran from it. So yes, I do believe that quitting is a cowardly act in a man's life. That is basically rejecting your manhood, is to quit. So me growing up in the 80s and 90s, that toxic masculinity that everyone bitches about was what kept us as boys from quitting, quite frankly. If you were on a baseball team, hypothetically, and you decided to walk off the game because you just quit the game, you weren't having a good game, your entire team and probably your coach would shun you. The next day you would go to school, and you'd probably be made fun of by your friends, and no one would sit with you at the lunch table, probably for the rest of the year, if you were that bad of a quitter or you walked out of the big game. So there was an unspoken code between boys and men to push each other so that we wouldn't quit, to shun each other when we did, so that we would never want to do that again. So it is very much frowned upon in the men's world, in the masculine world, to quit. And yes, I thought that I personally view that when I quit on myself, I became a coward. I lost my manhood, and it showed in the way I lived my life at that time. And I was embarrassed of it, and I still am. So yeah, quitting is very detrimental to your life. Obviously, it's spoken even in my research here. So I just wanted to give my personal opinion on it after I stated all my research.